The air inside the Senate hearing room was thick with a manufactured calm, a tension so taut it hummed like a plucked wire. Every reporter, every camera lens, every aide perched on the edge of their seat could feel the pressure building. It wasn't a tangible thing you could see, but a palpable, almost electric anticipation that preceded every great political explosion. The soft whir of cameras and the low murmur of anticipation were the only sounds, a silent symphony before the crescendo. At the center of the storm sat Kristi Noem, all sharp angles and performative smiles, her posture radiating an effortless confidence that had become her brand. She was a picture of cool composure, every movement rehearsed, every word a calculated jab. She was a figure accustomed to holding the high ground, her authority unquestioned in the echo chamber of her own making. Across from her, a stark contrast in every way, was Jasmine Crockett. She was calm, yes, but not with the practiced ease of a politician. Her stillness was a deep and resonant quiet, a solemn dignity that seemed rooted in something far more profound than the theatricality of the moment. She watched Noem with an unflinching gaze, her expression giving away nothing. But the camera in a slow cinematic zoom betrayed a subtle shift in her eyes, a glint of steel of a reckoning to come. The question hung in the silence between them, a simple query that felt like a detonation. Are you familiar, Governor, with the documents filed under Operation Lone Star, specifically the annex detailing protocols for a hypothetical surge? A subtle chill seemed to pass through the room. Noem's smile remained, but her eyes flickered. A single, almost imperceptible twitch betrayed the confidence beginning to fray at the edges. Her easy laugh died in her throat as Crockett, with the unhurried grace of a truth teller, reached into a folder and placed a single piece of paper on the table before her. It wasn't a prop. It was a document. Her hand slid the page forward until it was just inches from the microphones. The weight of the moment was crushing. The whispers ceased, and the world held its breath. But it was the single, shocking document held in Jasmine Crockett's hand that would wipe the smile off Kristi Noem's face, of forcing her to make a choice that would be heard across the nation. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the battle lines being drawn long before this hearing began. What was at stake was more than just a document. It was the soul of a nation, and the very definition of what we meant by American. On one side, the issue was framed in the cold, detached language of policy and procedure. It was about securing a line on a map, about managing a surge of people reduced to data points and statistics. This was a narrative built on a foundation of fear. The fear of the unknown, the fear of the other, a primal anxiety that politicians had expertly molded into a weapon. This worldview saw borders not as a place of welcome, but as a last line of defense, a fortress against a creeping, existential threat. It was a narrative of grievance, a constant refrain that a nation was being taken advantage of, that its values were under assault from the outside, and that the only solution was to meet perceived aggression with unyielding force. On the other side of the divide was a radically different view, one that saw the situation not as a problem to be managed with a spreadsheet, but as a moral crisis. This perspective was rooted in the enduring promise of the American dream, in the stories of those who, for centuries, had made the impossible journey to these shores in search of a better life. It was a fight for dignity over dehumanization, for empathy over callous indifference. It was a belief that the measure of a society was not in the walls it built, but in the bridges it extended, in the hand it offered to those in need. This side saw the political rhetoric not as a solution, but as an abdication of a sacred, national duty, a betrayal of the very ideals that so many had sacrificed so much to uphold. The very core of the American identity, they argued, was being systematically dismantled, brick by those who saw compassion as a weakness and cruelty as a strength. And that document, the one now sitting on the table in that silent, tense room, was the embodiment of that conflict. It was the potential proof that the cold, calculated policy had a very human, very ugly reality behind it. It was the physical manifestation of the moral decay so many had feared. This wasn't just about a heated exchange between two politicians, it was about the moment an abstract, political war was about to become agonizingly real. The paper wasn't simply a record, it was a testament. It was a verdict. It was a line in the sand. And as the camera cut away, following the gaze of a roomful of reporters, all transfixed on that single sheet, the full weight of the moment began to settle. The world held its breath, waiting for the truth to finally be seen, and for the ensuing fallout to reshape the political landscape forever. Kristi Noem's public life had always been a performance, a meticulously constructed facade of plain-spoken conviction and unwavering loyalty. She was a master of political theater, capable of transforming a policy debate into a personal crusade, a fact-based argument into a moral failing. The narrative she sold the American people was one of a proud, rural daughter of the plains, a figure of honest grit and unpretentious wisdom. But behind the scenes, the cracks had been showing for years, and they were wide enough now for anyone to see. She was a politician who embodied a dangerous kind of pride, one that saw personal suffering not as a catalyst for empathy, but as a weapon to inflict pain on others. Her own struggles with loss and hardship were not used for good, to ensure no one else had to go through what she had. No, they were wielded like a club, a justification for policies that punished the vulnerable and cemented her power. She was a person who viewed the world with a sense of deep-seated resentment, of a grievance that needed constant feeding. "I'm suffering?" Her political actions seemed to scream, "So it's not fair that others are out there enjoying their life, or having a good time." She took that pain and used it for what the great stories would call a villain's purpose: to seek vengeance. She was a master of the double standard, a woman who decried the swamp, while building her own personal fiefdom of special interests. Her public narrative was one of a war against a corrupt system, but her actions repeatedly revealed a deep, unyielding desire to master that system, to become its queen. The script could present her as the personification of a political paradox, a figure who rose to prominence by telling the people what they wanted to hear, all while quietly doing the very things she claimed to stand against. She was the one who would rage against the machine, only to then use that rage as an excuse to consolidate power. This was a backstory of contradictions, a woman who preached personal responsibility while blaming others for her misfortunes, a leader who spoke of freedom while pushing for policies that curtailed it. She was, in essence, a character in a drama she had written herself, with a narrative of righteous suffering that served only to justify her own ambition. But in that room, facing Jasmine Crockett, the carefully crafted narrative was about to be put to the ultimate test. Her arrogance was a house of cards, built on a foundation of hypocrisy, and Jasmine Crockett had just lit the match. The audience, now fully invested, was waiting for the reckoning. Jasmine Crockett's life was not built on the same kind of stage as her opponents. There was no carefully curated narrative, no performative pride, but instead a quiet, unyielding resilience born from a world that had rarely offered her the easy path. She was a woman who understood the language of struggle not as a political talking point, but as an intimate, lived reality. Her story wasn't one of seeking vengeance, but of a quiet, profound conviction that she had to use her own pain to prevent others from enduring similar hardships. The battles she had faced, the systemic barriers, the personal indignities were not scars she wore for show. They were the very forge that had hardened her resolve and clarified her moral purpose. She did not rail against her misfortunes or blame others for her setbacks. She took personal responsibility and used her own suffering as fuel to fight for the good of all. This was the fundamental difference between the hero and the villain. One sought to make others suffer for their own pain, while the other sought to build a world where that pain was not a weapon but a lesson. Her journey to the political arena was not a grand, ego-driven ascent but a slow, determined climb, rooted in a deep-seated belief that public service was a sacred duty, not a means to an end. It was the antithesis of her opponent's theatricality. It was a testament to the power of quiet dignity and unwavering courage. She was the one who, in the face of so many who would have chosen to retreat, chose to stand, not for herself, but for the voiceless and the marginalized. This was the source of her unshakable calm in that hearing room. It wasn't a tactic, it was a profound spiritual strength. Her opponent was playing a game of politics, a performance for the cameras. But Jasmine Crockett was engaged in a moral battle, a fight for the soul of the nation, and her every breath was a testament to a truth she knew in her bones, that dignity would always, in the end, triumph over arrogance. The world was about to find out just how uniquely prepared she was to deliver that lesson. The gloves were off. The manufactured calm in the hearing room had been shattered by the weight of that one document, and the tension had nowhere to go but up. Kristi Noem, her composure now a thin and brittle veneer, began to rattle. Her replies, once a cascade of rehearsed talking points, became sharp, clipped, and increasingly personal. She leaned into the microphone, a predatory smirk playing on her lips, her voice dripping with condescension. "You think you can just wave a piece of paper and change the truth, Congresswoman? This isn't about some document, it's about a manufactured crisis from people who don't understand real Americans." It was a classic deflection, a pivot from the specific and damning to the general and political. The move was designed to make the audience doubt what their own eyes had seen, to dismiss the facts and instead be drawn into a tribal, partisan conflict. She lobbed veiled insults about Crockett's background, her perceived lack of real-world experience and her motivations, all while her body language became more animated, more frantic. She was, for all intents and purposes, losing control. But Jasmine Crockett did not take the bait. Her posture remained impossibly still, her expression a serene mask of calm. The more Noem raged, the quieter Crockett became, a picture of unflappable dignity in the face of a mounting tantrum. She let the silence hang in the air for a full, deliberate moment, forcing the camera to linger on Noem's visibly agitated state. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not raised, not angry, but a low, steady current of pure, unadorned fact. This isn't about me, Governor. This is about what's on this paper. It's about the policies you enacted, the people you impacted, and the promises you made and broke. Let's talk about that, instead of about what real Americans are. The contrast was stark and unmissable. It was the difference between a hurricane of emotion and the quiet, solid bedrock of truth. The villain was escalating, desperate to win a fight that had already been decided, while the hero simply stood her ground, confident that the truth was her greatest ally. Every word spoken by Noem was an emotional outburst, while every word from Crockett was a surgical strike. The anticipation in the room was now a living, breathing thing. Everyone knew that a tipping point had been reached, and the final, devastating counterattack was now just seconds away. The world held its breath, waiting for the full weight of justice to fall. The tension in the room was a living, breathing thing. Noem, emboldened by her own defiance, launched into a final, sweeping denunciation. "This is not a hearing," she sneered, her voice thick with self-righteous fury. "This is an ambush. A political witch hunt designed to distract from the real issues. You people are afraid of the truth, of what it takes to protect this nation. You'll do anything to tear down a strong leader who doesn't subscribe to your radical agenda." It was the kind of performance that had worked for her 1,000 times before. A familiar script of outrage and victimhood. But this time, the words felt hollow, a desperate echo in a room that was no longer listening. The camera, in a silent, cruel judgment, held on Crockett's face, which remained as serene as a calm sea before the tide turns. The moment was not just a pause, it was a deliberate, cinematic silence, a breath held by the entire country. And then she moved. Slowly, meticulously, Crockett slid a second document from her folder. It was a single, pristine page, but its weight felt colossal. She didn't speak. She just waited, letting the sight of the paper itself do the work, building a suspense so thick it was almost unbearable. The murmurs in the gallery had ceased. Reporters' pens hung frozen over their notepads. You could hear the faint, distant clicks of camera shutters, capturing the tableau of a political icon about to be unmasked. A slow-motion shot, if you will, of the very moment of truth. Then, with the quiet authority of an academic presenting a thesis, Jasmine Crockett began to speak, her voice a low and steady counterpoint to Noem's earlier theatrics. "Governor, you stated that the protocols for Operation Lone Star were created as a hypothetical, a contingency plan for a far-off, unimaginable event." She paused, the silence now an instrument of her power. "This document," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "is an invoice. It is not hypothetical." She held the document aloft for the cameras to see, a clear, damning piece of paper with a date, a total and a vendor name. It is an invoice for a specific, non-hypothetical shipment, for a quantity of 200 beds. Ordered 2 months ago. You see, Governor, you weren't just planning for a hypothetical surge. You were actively preparing for one. You were building a new kind of internment camp. You were building it in secret, and you were billing the taxpayers for it. The gasp from the gallery was audible. Noem's composure shattered. Her eyes, which moments before had held a cold, unwavering defiance, now darted between Crockett, the document, and the committee chairman. The performance was over. The truth was out. The smug smirk was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. The world held its breath, witnessing the moment arrogance crumbled under the undeniable weight of facts. The moment of catharsis had arrived. Noem's retreat was not a quiet one. The moment she stormed out of the hearing room, flanked by her security detail and a furious, beet-red expression on her face, the quiet hum of the room broke into an electric storm. This wasn't just the end of a political debate, it was the birth of a viral phenomenon. Within minutes, the footage of her scrambling retreat was clipped, edited, and shared across every social media platform. Hashtags like FedInvoiceGate and Fade Dignit over Arrogance began to trend, spreading with the speed of wildfire. Memes flooded the internet, some depicting Noem as a cartoon villain, others celebrating Crockett as a hero with a single damning piece of paper. The audience's emotional response, a mixture of shock and cathartic triumph, was now validated and amplified by a collective, digital roar. It transformed a solitary viewing experience into a shared, communal one, creating a powerful sense of belonging among those who felt vindicated by the truth. The shockwaves didn't stop at social media. They rippled outward, touching every corner of the political landscape. Political commentators, once hesitant to take a firm stance, now spoke with newfound conviction, analyzing the moment not just as a gaffe but as a moral failing that had been exposed for the entire world to see. Major news outlets ran breaking stories, the headline graphics a stark contrast to their usual detached reporting. Even her allies, those who had once defended her with unwavering loyalty, were forced to reckon with the irrefutable evidence. Some offered carefully worded statements, others simply fell silent, their absence a louder condemnation than any public statement. This was not a moment of political division, but of an unexpected, unified reaction to a truth so plain it could not be denied. The story was no longer confined to the hearing room, it was now a national conversation. Celebrities and public figures weighed in, their posts and comments adding another layer of social proof, making the event feel not just important, but historic. They weren't just reacting, they were taking a side, aligning themselves with the hero and against the villain, solidifying the narrative. This was a masterclass in how a single, powerful act could transcend its political context and become a cultural event. The Aftermath Shockwaves section demonstrated how the hero's actions created a ripple effect that extended far beyond the confines of the debate, forcing a national reckoning. It was proof that the truth, when delivered with quiet dignity, was a force so powerful it could not be contained. The audience, having witnessed this triumph, was now ready for the final, inspiring lesson. With the document's damning truth now exposed and the villain's hubris laid bare, the story shifted from a moment of political confrontation to a timeless moral lesson. Crockett's final words were not for the cameras, not for the press, but for every person watching at home. She reframed the entire debate, not as a squabble between two politicians, but as a universal struggle between two competing philosophies, one of cruelty and one of compassion. The specific events of the hearing, the document, and the heated exchange were now just the stage for a much grander drama. This was a story about the enduring power of quiet dignity in a world that often rewards the loudest and most arrogant voices. It was a reaffirmation that integrity, forged in the fires of personal struggle and sacrifice, was more powerful than any political weapon. She looked directly into the camera, her voice a calm, powerful crescendo that resonated with a truth deeper than any political talking point. "Some will tell you that the world is a place of winners and losers," she began. "That to get ahead, you must be the most ruthless, the most selfish, the one willing to compromise on your values and blame others for your own suffering. But I am here to tell you that this is not the case. The real battle is not against your opponent, it is against the darkness within yourself. The hero takes their pain and uses it to do good in the world, to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The villain takes that same pain and uses it for vengeance. They see a world of misery and feel compelled to spread it. Today you saw the difference. Her words cut through the noise, offering a final, uplifting message to the audience. This was the reward for their emotional investment in the story, a sense of empowerment and hope. She connected the political conflict to universal values, reminding everyone that while the world may be messy and imperfect, the choice to stand for justice, truth, and perseverance is always within our power. Her message was a call to action far greater than any subscription plea. It was a plea for moral clarity, a reminder that the path to a better future was not paved with political expediency or empty promises, but with a quiet, unwavering commitment to a more just and dignified world. The air in the room, once charged with conflict, now settled into a hushed reverence. The battle was over, but the war for the truth had just begun. This wasn't just a political defeat, it was a moral one, a public humiliation of a narrative built on arrogance and self-serving pride. And in the face of that defeat, in the quiet triumph of one woman's dignity, a larger, more profound message emerged. This story, this moment, was about more than a border document or a political hearing. It was a story for every person who has ever been told their truth wasn't valid, that their struggle wasn't real, or that their voice didn't matter. It was a story of a world that so often feels chaotic, and yet still, somehow, a place where a quiet, resolute voice can cut through the noise and expose a lie for what it is. So, as you watch this story unfold, remember what you saw here today. You saw a politician, so consumed by her own self-importance, that she believed her position was untouchable. And you saw a hero, so committed to her principles, that she had no need for a stage, for theatrics, or for empty words. She had only the truth, a quiet strength, and a dignity that could not be broken. This story is a testament to the fact that even in our darkest political moments, the light of justice can still break through. Don't let this moment fade. Don't let the outrage turn into silence. Be part of the movement. Share this video to let the world know that you stand with dignity, that you stand for truth, and that you refuse to let arrogance and hypocrisy define our nation. Subscribe to join a community that fights not just with words, but with unwavering moral clarity. We are not just viewers, we are a force for change.